because we have a lot to get done this morning in an efficient way and some important decisions to make in the process of that. So I will kick that off to our general manager and let Mr. Beckham tell us what we're going to cover.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
We have served 3 items on the Utility Committee agenda today. They're complicated items which we're going to present in fairly simple form, but that is not to say that you can't ask any question you want to ask. So we'll give you all the information that you want. Gina Jacoby is going to talk to us about our rate study that's ongoing that you're aware of, and about budget. Yep, rate study and budget. And Tori Bombard is going to talk to us about the latest on fuel prices, and then we have a pretty sizable contract to talk about. So without further delay, Gina?
Okay, well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I am going to very briefly give you an overview of our budget because of the time constraints that we have this morning. So, but feel free after this session to, on a one-on-one basis, we can discuss the budget if you want to delve into it a little bit deeper and get into the numbers. I'm sure the finance folks out there would love to delve into the numbers. So anyway, let's get started. We take a look at our budget from a cash perspective because, as you know, cash is king. We look at it rather than from a net income perspective. And what you're seeing here is our net cash funding, or another way is our net cash flow. And you can see we're budgeting for a negative net cash funding requirement of $13.1 million. I'm going to walk you through the components of that $13.1 million negative net cash flow. Before we get started, though, I wanted to point out this favorable, unfavorable column. This tells you whether something is good news or bad news to the bottom line. So if it's positive, it's good news. If it's negative, it means your costs are going up, and it's bad news to the bottom line. So the first line item is non-fuel operating revenue. You'll notice I use the word non-fuel, and this is because fuel is simply a pass-through. So I've pulled it out of the budget so that you can focus on the base operations. You'll see that we're up $2.7 million, and that's 1.4%, and that's consistent with our load growth that we're anticipating. Now, one of the things I do want to point out is that I believe that $193.1 million that we're budgeting is a tad on the conservative side, and let me explain to you why I think that's the case. We are handedly exceeding our budget this year by about, well, year-to-date through June, we've been about $4 million favorable on a weather-normalized basis. Okay, we look at our load from a weather-normalized basis when we do our budgeting. We pull the weather effect out. So that tells me that we probably have about $4 to $5 million worth of upside to our budget, provided the economy holds up and that the in-migration that we're experiencing continues. So next line item is non-fuel cash O&M. Again, I'm focusing on the cash, not necessarily our net income, so I've pulled our non-cash expense items out, and I'm just focusing on the cash items. Those are up $5.9 million, or 6.6%. Now, I do want to point out that 70% of that $5.9 million is non-discretionary or uncontrollable. So that's $4.2 million of that 5.9 we can't do anything about because it's either mandated or it's non-controllable. The biggest item of that 5.9 is $2.4 million associated with the closure of our landfill for Unit 3. We are mandated by the EPA to close our landfill, and we are beginning to do so next year. So again, 2.4 is non-discretionary. We have to do it. The next largest item is our salaries and benefits, which are up $900,000. That's up 2.2%. That assumes a 5.5% increase, 5% COLA and a 2.5% increase in merit for our non-bargaining unit employees. The 2.2% seems a little low, and that is because we have lower pension expense as well as the mix of our employees is changing. We've got a younger set of employees that's coming in as our older, more senior people are retiring. So if I pull out all the non-discretionary items, our operating expenses go up 1.8%. So without those non-discretionary items. Capital expenditures, I'm focusing just on base rate funded capital expenditures, are up 2.3 million or 5.5%. A lot of this has to do with inflation, as you can expect, as well as we're really focused on reliability and storm hardening. At the plant, we're focused on increasing our planned expenditures for Unit 5, which is our workhorse, and is one of the more efficient units in the power pool and is called on almost on a daily basis. So we really want to keep that unit reliable. On the delivery side, they're really getting hit hard by inflation. Their cost of their materials, their key materials such as steel poles, they're up 45%, wood poles up 30%, and their transformers are up 40% year over year. So dramatic impact on their key materials. They're also switching a little bit. We're expecting less new growth as our development. We're expecting new development to slow down over the next year. And so we've taken the funds that were associated with new growth and we're focusing on storm hardening as well as reliability in the delivery side. Debt service is essentially flat, and this is despite the fact that we've increased our debt by $165 million, and this is associated with the RICE generation. Dividends to the city at $32.7 million are up 1.3. As you know, our dividends are a function of our load, so as our load grows, so do the dividends to the city, and this is what you're seeing here is increased dividends due to load growth. And investment and other income, we were really, that's down $0.7 million. Really what we're doing, we've seen that we probably over budgeted this year, so we're trying to be a little bit more reasonable, and we budgeted $5.9 million. So a negative $13.1 million. Basically, what I want you to take away from this slide is that our revenue growth of 1.4% is really not keeping up with inflation on the capital expenditure side as well as on the O&M side. And we do have a lot of non-discretionary items that we do need to cover on the operating expense side. So let's take a look at our risks and opportunities for the budget. And actually, there's more upside than downside. As I had mentioned, I see some opportunity on the load growth. I believe we're a little short and conservative. I believe it could be between 2 and 4 million incremental revenues that we could see. That's net of dividends. Again, as you know, anytime load increases the dividend, so does the dividend. So 2 to 4 million upside on the revenue side, and about 2 to 3 million on the vacancy float side. By vacancy float, I mean we tend to have about 30 vacancies a month. We carry about that much per year. We budget assuming that we've got full employment. So because of the vacancies, we do have a little bit of float. That's about 2 to 3 million a year. So in total, $4 to $7 million of upside. So from a risk-adjusted perspective, I think the 13.1 million really is more like 6.1 to 9.1 million negative. So there is good news on the budget front. So what does this negative number mean for our days cash? For those of you that are new to the utility committee, let me kind of orient you to this graph. It's a trend of our days cash, and this yellow bar right here reflects the AA range, the days that Moody's looks at being in the AA range. So what we want to do is we want to stay within that yellow bar. You'll notice that our days cash were at 258 in fiscal year 21. We're budgeting for them to drop to 198 at the end of this fiscal year. you're probably wondering what is going on. And what's happening is the fuel costs are going up dramatically, $47 million year over year. I've got the fuel costs up on the slide. Fuel is in the denominator of the calculation for days cash. I've got the calculation up at the top of the upper left-hand side. And you can see that includes fuel. So the higher the fuel, the lower the days cash. So the bulk of the decrease from 258 to 198 is all fuel driven. We're budgeting 174 days cash in fiscal year 23. And again, this has to do with the increase, the dramatic increase we're seeing in natural gas prices and the increase in our fuel costs that we are budgeting. They're up about, I believe, $34 million year over year. Matter of fact, if we excluded the impact of the fuel costs, our days cash would remain at 198 in fiscal year 93. So that tells you the big impact that fuel costs are having. One thing I do want to point out about that 174, and this is key, is this assumes that our reserves for the fuel are at 29 million, not the 20 million that we've been targeting in the past. As you know, the policy that's in effect is that our fuel reserve should be 15% of our budgeted fuel costs. That's 29 million, not 20 million. If we don't increase our fuel reserves to 29 million, we keep them at 20, that 174 drops to 163. So we're getting really perilously close to the bottom of that AA range, which has me concerned. Again, there's upside, as I had just mentioned, and if we take the upside into account, we're more at about 180 days cash, which is where Moody's would like to see us at. They indicated that if we drop below 180, that they would be concerned. So really our target is not 150, it's more like 180. So given the decline in the days cash, the negative cash flow that we're budgeting, it really begs the question, are our rates adequate? And I wanted to take you through why we're doing a rate study. As you know, inflation is one of the key drivers of the need for a potential rate increase. Last time we changed rates, we did it in 2018, and we based our rates on 2018 costs. So since 2018, we've seen 17% inflation. Okay, now I know recently we've been seeing a lot, but there's been inflation in 19 and 20 as well. So in total, 17% inflation in our costs. We've also increased our debt service. Again, this is since 2018 by 3.5 million. This is associated with the borrowings for the Rice generation. Now, we do have some downward pressures that are mitigating the impact of these upward drivers, so they're helping to reduce the need for a rate increase. The closure of Unit 3 is providing $8 to $10 million worth of savings a year, and that clearly offsets the incremental debt service associated with the Rice generation. So I just net these two together and see that it's mitigating it. We've also had load growth of about 6%, so our revenue's been up about $10 million, and that again helps mitigate the need for a rate increase. So given the fact we've got upward pressure and downward pressure, that really begs the question, really, are our rates adequate? So this is why we're doing a rate study, is to determine are our rates where they should be, and are they equitable throughout our customer classes. So let me quickly go through what the rate study entails. It's a long process. It's a 5-month process. And we're going to start in September, so next month, with our revenue requirement. Our revenue requirement is the revenue that we need to break even. So we determine, based on our total cash costs, what our revenue needs to be. If our revenue from actual rates is less than our revenue requirement, that tells you that we need to raise rates. Conversely, if our revenue that's coming from our current rates is higher, that tells us that we need a rate decrease. So, but this is in total for the total company, not by class. In order to determine rates by class, we need to allocate the cost to each customer class, and we'll do that in the October timeframe. Now, this is a very complex methodology, and it's really standard throughout the industry. So this is not something that we're doing on our own, but, I mean, this is standard, and the methodology is used both by IOUs as well as municipals. Finally, in November, we'll look at rate design. And this is really where we need your input the most, because this is where policy decisions are made. To give you an example, if we, let's say, want to lower the impact of, let's say we do have a rate increase and we want to lower the impact to our low-income customers, do we want to tier the rates? Currently, they're tiered, but do we want to change the tiering? Do we want to change, is there something else we can do to help the lower income? So again, this is where your policy and strategy come into effect, and we really need your input at this point in time. In the November, December, we'll have our final decision, and new rates will be implemented in March of 2023. It takes us about 2 months to update our systems, and particularly if there's a large change in rates, it takes us about 2 months to make the change to our system. And plus, March is a shoulder month, so if we do have a rate increase, it'll minimize the impact on our customers. So with that, are there any questions? I know I've raced through things very quickly.
First of all, my comment would be you did an extraordinary job at doing that, and so thank you for doing so in the detail within it. It's wonderful. Questions on utility from the members? Commissioner Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. McCoy, for the presentation. Now, if you're looking at our load growth, which,
Yes.
Takes an effect to support, what I say, and what I've been, shared with over the years, support keeping our rate, at a nominal kind of situation. But we got load growth that's coming in, and I think you said earlier in your comments that we would find it maybe tapering off in some respect.
My concern is the economy, and if the economy takes a downturn, that could affect our load growth. In addition, we're seeing a dramatic increase in migration, people moving down from the north or from other areas, and has been driving our load growth. If that comes to an end, that could impact our load next year.
And that would have an adverse effect.
That's correct.
And now, Moody's, I'm trying to make sure, the number of days that we're trying to make sure we stay within cash on hand is how much again?
Moody's looks at 180 at the floor.
We try to stay between
150 and 250.
150 and 250, okay. All right, and my last question, if you allow me, Mr. Mayor. We talk about coming into a final decision next year, this fall. For next year's effective date. The tiering mechanism that we have now, which supports, of course, as you just mentioned, those rate classes in some respect for residential and others. You want us, well, I won't be here, but no, I won't be here, so. But you want us as a utility committee to be able to support what we did, because we did a different kind of a mechanism back in 2018.
Yes, what we did is we took a look at our cost of service by customer class.
Yes.
And then we decided that we wanted to be between 95% and 105% of the cost of service. And we did that because of policy reasons, as well as the fact that we wanted to make sure that, let's say, compared to our neighboring peers, our commercial rates, let's say, weren't excessively high relative to, let's say, TECO's. So we might decide to recover our commercial rates at 98% of the cost of service, and then somebody else needs to pick up, would be subsidizing that. So there's a lot of policy and strategy that goes into effect at that point in time when we set rates.
That's it, my last one, but this will be my last one. Are we still utilizing the, I forget what you call the committee that helps support getting the word out to citizens?
The advisory panel?
Yeah, are we still using them in support of how we move toward this rate study and being able to share with our citizens about what's happening?
Yes, we do plan to bring the folks in from the neighborhoods as well as from the business community and address the issue.
Okay, so that committee, which was established,
Yes.
will be able to be our mouth, our piece.
Focus group.
Yeah, the focus group.
I would call it a focus group.
Yeah, they'll be our mouthpiece, be able to share and explain as well.
Yes,
They're different groups, right?
yes.
Okay.
So for clarity purposes, it's that before, while we're in the study, or after?
That really is right around the revenue requirement timeframe. Right now, we don't even know if we're looking at a cost increase or decrease because of the mitigating factors.
So neither. Okay, yes, Committee Member Troutman.
As everyone else has said, thank you for your presentation, Ms. Jacoby. You listed all the factors on the analysis of the net cash funding page and talked a lot about non-discretionary pressures causing the negative effects of inflation. On this page, however, is there anything that there is discretion over?
Yes, on our travel and entertainment, we have discretion.
Travel and entertainment?
Excuse me, not entertainment, travel and training.
Business entertainment, it goes back decades.
On supplies, there is some discretion. Again, supplies, it depends if the supplies are out at the plant. That's more non-discretionary. The chemicals that we use there is we need to use for NOx purposes. But particularly on the general and administrative side, there are discretionary items.
Okay, and we'll look through all of that at some point?
That's correct.
Now, what about the dividend to the city? Is that part of the discretionary list?
No, the dividend is a function of the load,
Okay.
and that's our policy. And that is just based on what our load growth is at that point in time.
So if you're really hot outside during the summer, that's the one place that can make you smile.
That's right.
And also because there's a watching public as well as new committee members, could you also remind us why it is important for us to stay within that AA bond rating? Can you unpack that so the public
Yes.
understands that as well?
It's important to stay within our AA range because if we do go to market or when we go to market, and actually we're going to market to refinance some notes, our variable rate notes. We're going this year. Staying in the AA range determines our interest rate. So if we fall out of and we get downgraded by, let's say, Moody's or S&P, that will adversely impact our interest rates and will be higher costs for our customers.
And that's even without a rate increase.
That's correct.
And the benefit of that we gained when the Rice engine loan was taken out because of the fact that our rating was so low. So it's even better in the market than we anticipated.
I think that was all the questions that I had. Yes, that was it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Other questions or comments by committee members? All right, excellent.
Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah, I sure had. Okay. Good to see you.
You too.
Darn.
Gina, on the
I
debt,
was hoping to sit down.
one more, on the debt service, do we, beyond 23, do do we have projections for that? Do we expect it to increase with, some of the other obligations?
It'll remain relatively flat,
Okay.
is our
So we're-
projection.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we'll talk about our opportunity to take a look at the fuel rates, given what we've just heard as well.
Let me direct you to August 1st. Normally, I'm not here till September. So I said if I came back earlier, that I was not going to be good. So let's move on. So you may have noticed, it's been a little hot. I mean, it's hot all over the world. We're having record heat waves. I think this July, the heat is 2% higher. And it has just been so hot that everybody's loads are up. And so, of course, when loads are up, there's a lot more demand for fuel. I thought I was really going to have some good news because this Fremont LNG, liquid natural gas, it represents 17% of our export. It caught on fire. So that meant there was going to be more domestic gas left here. So I thought, in June, I said, oh my God, fuel rates came down. I'm going to have some good news. Well, that was about a week, and then that went away. Because then our next thing was we had the Transco pipe maintenance outage, and that's a big artery that comes to the state of Florida. We get our gas from the Marcellus area, and it feeds our FGT and our Gulf Stream pipelines in Florida. And so it's in a maintenance. And then not only is it in a maintenance, we now have the SONAT that's having troubles. And where the Henry Hub is where the 9 pipelines all come together in Louisiana. So when you get 2 out, then you start getting constraints, the old cliche supply and demand. Well, our supply in Florida has been limited. And what has happened is we have a new thing that's never happened before. Usually when we buy our gas, we buy it at the end of the month, which is the Henry Hub. So when I'm showing you the forward curves, that's pretty well what I would be base loading gas. Now, because of this constraint, we have to pay a basis differential. So let's go to the next slide. So what that means is, normally, like the market would have closed out, for July, and I would have base loaded my gas at this little red dotted line. But because of this new thing of, limited supply, I'm now base loading gas anywhere between $1.25 to $8 above what the future markets are. And that's why in the month of July, we started seeing $16 gas. It's because Florida is paying this premium. You might look at the forward curves and say, well, Victoria, it's only $8, $9 out there. Yeah, if you can get it. So we're now paying this premium. And this premium, we still receive money back, like on our hedging. These are our hedges right here. I'm at $5, and I think it's $5.25. So I'm going to get about $9 million back here. But before, my baseload gas would have been around where the red dotted line is. And base loading is a physical hedge. Remember, there's financial hedge, where I go to the market. It's like selling stocks and bonds, kind of their options. And then physical is you receive the gas. So because my physical hedge cost has went up, that's why I'm here. Because that means we're paying more for our fuel. So we go to the next slide. You can still see the blue line represents what our cost per megawatt would be if we didn't have the hedging program. And the green line is showing it. But because now I'm paying more for fuel, the gap's gotten smaller. So I'm still looking at the $60 rate. I'm in August at 71, September 70, 56, and October. Now the problem is, what I don't know is September is when the pipeline outage is supposed to end. And so we're in uncharted territories. We don't know how long this basis differential, if this is the new normal, or if it's, going to decrease. When I look out, we have a platform ICE. It shows a basis differential out to about November 23, but it has it declining. Right now, I've been at $8, and it goes to $2, and it's got next summer about 35 cents. But it's just hard to know. So when I'm still out here in the outer months, I'm showing the price of gas coming down based on what we can see, but we all really don't know. Because there's a lot of things going out there. Right now, even the railroads are threatening to strike, okay? Not just, for fuel, but for freight and everything. So there's a lot of things going on in the market, and so it's not just us. Everybody, the country doesn't kind of know what's going to happen. So if we go to the next slide, what I do know, though, is we're sitting right here, okay? And I'm sitting very low on reserves. We've got about 13.3 million. Even though the books haven't closed out, I pre-did it. And I know right about there, I'm going to recover about 4.2 million in July, which means I'm going to be roughly about 9.1 million. And if we keep a $60 rate, this little red line right here, we're going to be, this line right here is zero. And when Gina DeCovey was talking to you, and she was telling you the days of cash, that's that green line. That's the 29 million. We're not going up, we're going down, okay? And it's because our fuel costs have went up more with the basis differential, so I'm not getting as much back as I thought I was going to get with the hedging program. That's what I thought we were at $60, because I thought I'd be base loading at that little red dotted line. But now I've got a premium on top of that. So this orange line represents a $70 rate. I'm not sure what color this is. Maybe if
Brown, we'll call it brown.
yeah, kind of.
Rust.
It's rust. The rust line is 75, and the blue is the $80. Okay. But what I thought I would start doing is, I think you should start seeing me more often, like every month, because, like I said, we're in uncharted territories. And when I put these together, I'm putting it together with what we're seeing right now. This is more of a more worst-case scenario in these months right here. I'm still keeping us with a higher basis differential because that's what we're showing. But if the supply starts coming back, then fuel prices will go down some. And if the heat would just come off. I mean, that's the problem. It's so hot that everybody's using every molecule in the pipeline, okay? And then you top it off with constraints in the country, coal, other in the Carolina areas, not able to switch. It just puts more demand on the gas. But usually October, November, December, we call shoulder months. Hottest months, of course, going to be July to September. So if we start seeing some relief with the weather, that will help some. But what I think it's going to take a while because we've been taking our fuel out of the storage when I talk to the suppliers because of the constraints. So they're going to want to build back up. So we might not start seeing relief until November, December. But this is where we're sitting now. And if we go to the next slide, this isn't the first time, that we've had rates in the 70s. We've been back in 2008, we had 72.70, and we've had rates in the 75. But I want to direct your attention to the next slide. Next slide. So this is where we're at right now. Okay. Right now, our current rate all in is about 124.87 or 0.12487 cents a kilowatt hour. We're still not going to be the highest, and we just found out that. Remember I told you all the investment-owned utilities, the Florida Power and Lights, the Dukes, they couldn't hedge? Well, we just now know they're going back. The last time they changed their rates was January 1st. They've just now all went back and said, hey, we got to change our rates because they're going to lose in the billions where they're projecting. Like right now, Florida Power and Light was projecting $1.65 billion. They're under recovering. Duke's $1.31 billion. Atico $411 million. So we're all in this together. It's not just us. It's all over the country. And with a $70 rate increase, it would put us at a $134.87 altogether. And OUC's rate right now is $124, Tallahassee's $125, and JA's $135. But I know that JA is going to increase the rate. I'm just not sure. It's going to be, I think, another $10. So we'll probably be the third, with OUC Tallahassee and Lakeland, because JE will be higher than us, and Gainesville, and all the RUs will be higher than us. So we're not, even with a rate increase, we're still lower compared in the state of Florida. So that being said, we go to the next slide. I'm proposing a $70 rate because, and this rate would not become effective to September. Because remember, October is the hottest month, so our ratepayers, we're trying to, we know it's hard out there for folks. So they still have the $60 rate, still going to under recover. And if I start coming to you maybe monthly, and if we have to gradually keep stepping it up versus trying to go after a bigger, large rate, but if we don't, we are under recovering, and like Gina said, we have to stay in that yellow box. And she's projecting the fuel rates to start to go up to get back to a 29 million reserve, because right now, at the end of July, we're going to be at 9.1 million, and then at August, I'll be at about, I think, 5.4 million. So, it's not good.
If we go back to page 5, which is which shows our reserve.
Right.
No,
Yeah, one more. Just one more. So
the
right
lower
now,
one is 60. That's 60 on the decline, right?
yeah, this is a $60 line. And like I said, right now, I'm projecting at the end of July, we're here, about 9.1. We're going to be at 5.4. And by September, we're in the red.
And this is where we have had, as a utility committee, a goal to stay at 20 million-ish
Right.
in that range, and 29 was even
Right.
restricted.
And this is a zero. This is not a $20 million line. That's around zero. That's saying we're finally out of cash. The green line is what Mr. Jacoby was saying, at the 29 is where we need to be in order to, where she was projecting her days of cash, she's projecting, and I take this blue line and I get up
The
there.
blue line represents an $80 change.
Yes.
Okay, so, and you're recommending 70, which is the line underneath blue?
Yes, right
or the
here,
orange?
it will start, we'll be kind of covering our cost, and then I thought if I came each month, we can see how we're doing, and, that's what JEA's been doing, they've been changing it every month, unless you really want it to just go there, I mean.
Well, or $75. I'm just curious.
Yeah, this is 75, 80, 70.
75 seems to be a better position.
I agree, I just know that right now, what's happening is, as you know, when you consume more electricity, it puts you in higher tiers. And each tier is a higher rate, then you put on a higher fuel rate, and I know it's really hard for people right now.
We normally like to be conservative, and we feel like you're being conservative.
I'm trying to think, because I know your folks are going to be ringing off in your emails.
I understand, but
we are in
the
a bad
complexities of
situation.
understanding how important it is to keep interest rates right,
Right.
that we keep our cash positions correct, the responsibilities each of us have to have in terms of adjusting those rates at a rate that we don't become foolish in an environment where all these uncontrollable variables don't see any means of having an immediate reduction. I mean, it just, if you look at history, we're going to have restrained supply, we're going to have high temps. It would just seem 70 slow.
Yeah. it is.
Dan?
It seems to me that, I agree with Bill there, that 70 seems to be low. And if every month we keep adjusting, the volatility to the consumer, may be a little bit more unacceptable. But if we bump it to 75 and hold it there for a while to see, to let it track out, it'll decrease that volatility to the consumer, because if we're looking at a rate increase that starts next March, and if we keep adjusting that, it may drive some of our customers absolutely crazy with budgeting, because right now most businesses and whatnot are in their 2023 budgeting process, and if we show something that they can somewhat depend upon as a number they can look at rather than every month it bouncing around. I think limiting the volatility is a better approach. I hate to see 75, but I'm concerned about the volatility every month.
Commissioner McCarley?
I totally agree. If they can be consistent, especially, I'm glad you brought up the budget year, because I think that is really important to look at for businesses and commercial ratepayers.
Other committee member comments? Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Tori. Have we experienced a spike in requests for assistance from residential customers or late payments? How is that in the current environment of more usage?
I'm not customer service, so I really
I
can't.
cast the question to anybody who's...
We have had some. I don't know, Catherine might be able to, I wouldn't call it a spike.
Yeah.
But we have had some.
I was just curious, with the, as hot as it's been, and people are using more electricity, if we've seen that. And Mayor, I think you make a strong case for it. I think the chart is compelling when we look at where we could end up and where we need to go. But just in the context of our residential customers, I was curious, are we seeing more people who are struggling to pay those monthly bills or concerned about how high they have jumped? If anybody has it.
We have certainly seen an increase in calls and emails about high bill complaints and requests for assistance, but I don't have specific numbers to give you what percentage that is.
So we, like other utilities, have really emphasized our programs that people can use, and we're trying to get that and keep that information out there, that people have opportunities to have the energy audits and to get rebates and things like that to try to help out with that. And then there are some programs where we help customers that are in distress. One of the things that we've gotten feedback on is that one of the reasons we keep suggesting smaller increases is customer says, why can't you phase this in instead of hitting us all at once? We've gotten that feedback, so that's one of the reasons that we try to suggest the sort of lowest increase that we think we can survive and get by with. And this one, the orange line, that's the reason we're bringing you 70, and we're certainly wide open to 75. We're good with 75 if that's what you're comfortable with. But we brought the 70 because that does get us to December, assuming, this is all assuming everything plays out, because right now we still have that Transco outage, and we have the LNG terminal. Those things are already in play that have caused fluctuations. Anything else could come along that could cause a fluctuation. But assuming everything plays out as Tori has projected, that will get us into December, and cooler weather should start to show up sometime to ease things off a little bit. So we looked at that as a reasonable. I think the red line above that is 75 is very reasonable. I wouldn't recommend going to blue. That's probably overshooting. Certainly staying on the current path is not advisable. I think the 70 or 75, either one, is reasonable, and then we would respond to our customers' request, anything we can do to help.
Yeah.
Furthermore, we could include that in the rate study.
Sure. One other, so you think 70 would get us where we need to be through December, is what you're saying?
Given that
What we know now.
What we know now, and given that Tori comes back every month, so she may very well be back next month saying, let's go to 75.
Which I do like that idea, Tori, of having you come and brief us on this every month. It seems like every other week or more, we're reading something about the natural gas conditions in the country, so it's helpful to hear.
Right, and even if I came back,
just to brief us on it, even if we're not requesting a
I'll
rate.
say good news.
Yeah. So I don't know, I'd look to my colleagues, hearing Mr. Beckham, I think there's maybe a case to be made for staying at 70 until, we have to go higher.
I do think that one thing that came up during Gina's presentation that people need to understand, I don't know that the average person that's going about our life doing our thing really thinks about this that much, but if we do slip down into troubled area and AA and we drop down to A and we're borrowing money, we're borrowing at a higher rate, which is a cost. And that goes back to the customer too. So we don't want to go there.
Commissioner Madden.
Thank you, Mayor. So I was just wondering if someone could remind us what our Irma recovery costs were.
I'm sorry.
When we recovered from Hurricane Irma, how much we paid?
We recovered about 18 million.
Okay. So just think about that. The Keys are still paying interest on the loans they took to recover after Irma.
Yeah.
And so by August, we have $5.4 million in our cash. Sounds like a lot to a lot of people, but one hurricane cost $18 million.
Good point.
And so that makes me very concerned. Interest rates certainly raises costs, but hopefully we won't have a storm. But if we do, and we don't have cash to recover, people will be really cranky if we have no lights and electricity, for weeks because we don't have the cash to recover.
there is another possibility. I probably shouldn't say this because last time I said this, it happened, but the pipeline outage, Cindy remembers the pipeline outage in the Northeast? We were talking about that at the time, and we were talking about, wow, the hacker, the country, I forget who it was, so somebody hacked in and shut a pipeline down, a gas pipeline down in the Northeast. And I mean, something like that could always happen, and that would have a negative impact on fuel. So, you know, it's something, if something, I only bring that up because if something like that happened, it would cause that 70 line to be less conservative than we thought it was when we're sitting here looking at it. That would be an argument for the 75. And of course, who knows, hopefully nothing like that happens here. That, a terrorist action on a pipeline, just a pipeline failing, a failure like the Transco or something like that, any of those kind of events could cause things to
Thank you. Again, it's ironic, we had a group of friends yesterday and last night we were talking about utility rates and how everybody's making adjustments at their house. You know, we're cutting we're at 79 versus 77 and everybody's making adjustments. And there again, to expedite things, I'd like to see the hands raised for 75, and we can see if we can get this thing out of the way.
Make a motion.
I'll make a motion to go to $75.
And there's a second discussion by utility committee members, and that would be Mr. Bush.
The thing that I'm hoping for is that being conservative at 70, we would see a trend of reinforcement of those pipelines and everything gets fixed and everything, which when Tiger's motion to move to 75 makes sense, because if Torrey's line in the rust bends a little bit because of better situations. My concern, back to Gina's presentation, is serving on other boards, you can't get out of that AA. I mean, if you do, you're in deep stuff.
No, you don't want to do
For lots of reasons.
I think 75 makes the most sense, because even if we are in the doldrums right now about what has happened, but if they fix it and we get better flow and we get better situation with pricing, it could bend that rust-colored line more rapidly upward, so that we're not going to touch zero anytime along the line. I don't want to touch zero, because that's detrimental all the way across the line. So even if we're looking at the rust line and in February, we're at zero, and we don't make that adjustment to 80 or 85 or whatever later, I think it's better to make and it's a 25% leap. 60 to 75 is a 25% leap. But, I mean, Gina's already illustrated, polls have gone up 30% and other stuff in the industry has gone up that way. I mean, I know that people are looking at gasoline right now and they understand it's reclined a little bit, but it's all gone up over the last 2.5 years, 3 years. So we need to recognize that needs to go into the budget of a household, a commercial business, or whatever. So I'm concurring with Tiger on it.
Okay, Commissioner Walker and then Commissioner Troutman. And
Well, I think he was first, but
10 minutes.
Yield to age.
You're called on, Mr. Commissioner Walker.
Well, I think it was mentioned by Committee Member Tillman and Commissioner McCauley. I think families need consistency. And if we can not have to just up and up every month, yes, I agree, coming back to us every month and be able to share with us how it looks and what's happening, it speaks volumes. We need to know. And we need to make sure we stay within what is happening, what is expected. But you need consistency. Just to have a roller coaster ride in the life of a family member, in a household or business, it's not good. So that's why I thought, yes, I heard him say that, Commissioner Tillman, as well as Commissioner McCauley, and it's our thinking, and as even my dear brother Jack mentioned, we can see that rust line kind of curve as stay off the I call it neutral zone.
Right, that's a good word.
You want to get out of the neutral zone. You want to try to get above that.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for us to do that. So that's the reason why I'm saying I agree with what the motion is.
Committee Member Troutman? Or do you want to vote?
Ms. Torrey, you mentioned to start off, you said that people are hurting. Chad then brought it back up again in his presentation. Do we know what impact that is to the average household if we go to 70 versus 75? Do we have any of that?
Well, just remember, our rate had been 40. So if you take 75 minus the 40, that's, what, 35? So with the 35 on, plus, your average electric bill is 1,200 kilowatt hours. That's only at 1,000, the 35. Plus, you're going into higher, you have 1,000, 1,200, and 1,500. And each time you go into a different bracket, your rates go up. So I would think, don't quote me on this, but people are probably paying another $70, $80 a month that they're not used to seeing. And electric bill is a big part, especially as a retiree and things like that. So that's why we just like to be conscious of that. But like I said, this rate would not go into effect to September 1st. So it gets us through August, the hottest month. We'll be staying just at the $20 change from 40 to 60.
And then in September.
And then usually September,
Cooler temperatures.
in October, from October to December, we call it the off shoulder because the heat is supposed to come down. And so you're not consuming as much electricity, so even with the higher rates, you'll see your bills come down.
And then earlier in your presentation, you mentioned that I think the pipeline outage ends in September as well. Is that what you're?
That's what they're projecting, to come back online. It's been in a maintenance.
And then that could have an impact on the cost of fuel as well, which could potentially lower costs. So you could be back in front of us recommending that we go back down. If the
we're so
exterior
low.
environments line up.
We need to, or at least, come in.
Right, optimism.
Right.
I would, eventually, yes. If we got through a couple months and I could see that we're starting to go up, then I could.
Sure.
The reason I'm saying is because if we go 75 and you're back in front of us in another month and the stars align, it's probably easier for people. I like to tell customers when I can go to them and I can say, hey, we saved you some money and come back down on a rate and going up on the rate. That's an easier conversation to have. So that's what I'm trying to gather from you. It sounds like there's a lot that can happen in September, weather, the pipeline, other exterior factors that we have no control over that could be favorable.
They could be, but then there's a pending strike.
Sure, yeah.
So
The good news is likely to play out over a longer period than September. I wouldn't expect to come back in here in September and say, things are great, we're going back down. That's probably not going to happen. Just to be candid, just to be transparent about it, it's going to play out over a longer period of time than that. But there is a point, to your point. There would be a point where we most likely could come back, hopefully, unless natural gas stays high forever, but we could come back and say, yeah, we can find another point that's more comfortable and lower cost.
Yeah,
There should be that point at some point.
The very last thing I'll add is, or a question I'll ask is for you and Catherine. Are you all getting information out, not just to the consumer about your opportunities for saving costs, but to the service providers that engage with the consumer? My wife recently, took advantage of the rebate after we had our AC unit drained or something like that. We did at the house recently, but it was the provider that initiated that conversation with her in that moment. So getting that information into their hands, I think, would be helpful to those individuals out to the consumer as well.
I know that Catherine has been very, very focused on communications because that education, communication is one of the best things we can do right now. Catherine, do you want to say anything else about that?
Yes, absolutely. We are talking to both residential and commercial clients, customers, but also going out to dealerships for electric vehicle rebates, to HVAC repairmen when they come out and do maintenance. So we do go out to our list of contacts. And we did just increase some of our rebates on individual items. That comes out of a fund that is only designated for rebates, so that money can't be used for anything else. And we increased some of those based on the increased cost of those services and materials for the customers at the stores and by the providers.
As well as some neighborhood meetings, and it is on the website. Committee Member Tillman.
Yeah, I agree with Jack on all of this. And kind of anecdotally to take a look at it, when we went from 40 to 60, we essentially raised rates 2 cents a kilowatt hour. If we go to 75, it's another penny and a half. And you think in those terms, and going to 3.5 cents, it takes us from about 11.5 cents a kilowatt hour all the way up to 15 cents a kilowatt hour. But we're still competitive in taking a look at where we stand in the national average. It also gives us an opportunity, if we keep that volatility minimized, who knows? Maybe you can come back in here and say, hey, we need to drop it, and get good news. I think that we have a responsibility to keep ourselves in a place where we don't do a larger global problem with interest rate changes, because they are going up.
Yes.
And there's no question about that. And if we have to go out and do some funding, we're going to see that increase in itself to start with. And if something happens here where our position doesn't look good, that will be another thing on top of it that is just very negative. So I guess I'm in favor of the recommendation to go to 75.
So let's take a vote. All those committee members that are in favor, raise their hands. All those opposed? Unanimously passes. Next topic.
Thank you. The other topic is our contract promotion.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to try to run through this rather quickly. This is an agreement with KC Industrial, Inc. This is for undergrounding work for the Rice project. As you know, once the purchase of the engines was approved back in 2021, we informed you that we bring you a number of contracts in order to complete the building of this project, the Rice project, and the plant. This is a pretty significant phase of the project. This is all the undergrounding work that basically sets the foundation and the infrastructure upon which those engines will sit. We have gone out for bid. We received 3 responses back. KC Industrial came back at not the lowest cost, but certainly upon review, the most cost-effective bid that we received that could best meet the bid specifications. And part of what they will do with the foundation and the infrastructures, they'll be providing grading and digging. There'll be installation of electrical ducts, piping, cleaning, and testing, also pile driving to support the foundation, the pouring of the concrete on which the engines will sit, as well as unloading and cataloging all of the equipment that arrives on the project site. One of the reasons, I just want to give you a little context with regard to why RACO, which was the lowest cost bid, was not selected. There were a couple of, in evaluating that, RACO's price failed to include some of the several scope items, and the pricing was not actually firm in their bid, which was certainly a concern as we see price fluctuations occurring. They also had not accounted for time and material work for unloading that equipment, so that was also a question mark with regard to price and where that would go. They also had limited experience with regard to the Rice installation and power plant installation. So based on all of those factors, RACO was not selected. The term of the agreement with KC would be effective August 1st upon your approval, and the anticipated completion date of all the work for the contract is supposed to be December 23rd of this year. Just a couple of other highlights with regard to the contract. KC will be required to have a performance bond in place. That's in accordance with Florida statute for the total dollar value of the contract. That's to protect the city. There's also incorporated in that there's liquidated damages. Obviously, time is of the essence to complete this project to make sure the foundation is ready for when the engines come. So the liquidated damages are in the amount of $35,500 per day, and that would start January 6th if the project isn't completed. There is warranty provisions in the contract that provide for a 1-year warranty from substantial completion. If KC has to come back and do any fixes or modifications, the warranty period will restart, and then it'll be an additional up to 24 months from substantial completion that the city will be covered for that work. In addition, there's an indemnity provision in the contract that requires Casey to indemnify the city for any bodily injury or property damages that result from Casey's negligence or willful misconduct in regard to their performance of the contract. There's significant insurance requirements also in the contract. Casey is required to have $5 million of commercial general liability. There's also $1 million of contractor's pollution liability, environmental impairment liability. Also, there's crane and riggers liability of $1 million built into that, as well as errors and omissions professional liability in the amount of $5 million. Upon evaluation of the bid price that Casey offered, it was modified by both Lakeland Electric staff and our consulting engineer, Sargent and Lundy, by an amount of $637,651. That was based on modifications to scope and additional requests for clarification that both parties discussed. The contract price for services there, based on that adjustment, total $16,837,242. However, in addition, the city staff is requesting a contingency amount of 3%, which basically is about $505,000 in order to account for things that come up with a project. Again, this is undergrounding work. It may seem simple, but I think once they start working, they could run into things that is very technical and complex. So we wanted to make sure that that additional contingency amount is built in. Based on that, we would ask for approval of a total contract price of $342,359. That undergrounding work is all part of what is included in the RICE project and the bond that has been issued for the project as well.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
And a second discussion? Commissioner, committee member English.
Again, I want to just told Mike and Ramona earlier, Sergeant Lundy did a marvelous job of defining the scope. 420 pages of contract. I mean, they did marvelous. You guys that are working on the project, I mean, thank you very much for getting them to clearly define every darn thing, just about. If they don't understand it by now, they ain't going to do it right. So Casey's probably going to do it exactly the way we want it done.
Good.
That's what you want.
Any other discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Unanimously passes. We are done and meeting in the commission meeting room instantly.